They shaved my hair to the scalp the week they demoted me, so that no one in the yard would mistake my rank for anything higher than it was. A cadet line royal with a flawed caste mark is not a princess. She is a sorter. I learned that the first morning, standing in a queue of gray coveralls under the fluorescent strips of Underlight Yard, waiting to be handed a scanner and a crate and told where the discard line began. Nobody spoke to me for the first 4 months. That was the rule, though no one had ever written it down. The other sorters kept their trays 2 tables away at mealtimes, the way you keep distance from a spill you don't want tracked across the floor. I understood the geometry of it. I had grown up on the other side of that same geometry, watching servants keep their distance from me, and I had never once wondered what it felt like from the empty side of the table. Now I knew. It felt like weather, something you stood inside and could not argue with. I learned to eat quickly, facing the wall, so the empty bench across from me would not be so obvious to anyone passing. I learned which supervisors would look at my caste mark and slow their walk, deciding whether today was the day to say something, and which simply logged my output and moved on, without meeting my eyes at all. I told myself that was mercy, the not looking. A court that erases you at least does you the courtesy of never pretending you were still in the room. A yard that sorts you into your bracket and forgets you is, I thought, the honest version of the same cruelty. I had stopped expecting anything else from either world. The human worked the loading dock on the far side of the yard, moving crates twice his own weight, with a patience that never once turned to temper. I noticed him the way you notice anything unchanging in a place built to grind everything down to the same gray level. Marcus Teal, dock loader, thick through the shoulders, a scar through one eyebrow, gray coming in early at his temples, though he could not have been much past 40. He never looked at me the way the others did, which is to say, he never looked away from me either. He looked at me the way he looked at a crate that needed lifting, like a thing that existed and had weight and deserved to be set down carefully. The first time he sat across from me, I thought it was an accident. He put his tray down, nodded once, and ate in silence, and I was so unused to a body sharing my table that I forgot to eat at all. Foreman Orr came by within the hour and told him, in the flat administrative voice they save for corrections, that cross-caste seating was a yard safety matter, that trays got confused, that it wasn't personal. Marcus said he understood. Then he sat with me again the next day. He never made a speech about it. He never asked me about the mark on my cheek or the crown I no longer had a right to mention. He asked me, on the 3rd day, if I liked music, and when I said I didn't know because no one had ever offered me any, he set a small battered player on the table between us and pressed a button, and something old and slow and full of long, humming notes came out of it. Nothing like the ceremonial horns of my father's court. Nothing like anything I had a name for. He said it was older than either of us. He said his grandfather used to play it on nights the power grid ran quiet, back on a world I had never heard of and never will. I did not understand a note of it. I understood for the first time in 4 months that someone had chosen to offer me something with no use to it at all, no labor value, no favor owed, simply because he thought I might like it. Orr wrote him up twice more that week. Each time, Marcus took the citation without argument and sat with me the following shift regardless. I asked him once why he kept doing it when it cost him standing with the foreman. He set his fork down, which for him was the equivalent of another man raising his voice, and said that he'd spent 11 years in a uniform, being told which people were worth his attention and which weren't, and that the list had never once made sense to him, and that he'd stopped trusting lists a long time before he ever set foot on this moon. There was a night, weeks into it, when the grid browned out and the overhead strips dimmed to a low amber hum. Everyone else filed toward the emergency exits out of habit. Marcus stayed at the table, unbothered, and said the dark never worried him on cargo runs, that a man learns to trust his hands over his eyes if he does the work long enough. In that low light I saw him properly for the first time, not the shape the fluorescence made of him, but the actual weathered lines of his face, the old scar pulling faintly at one eyebrow. He asked, quietly, whether the mark on my cheek had hurt when it was cut in. I told him it hadn't been cut, only stamped, and the pain had come later, in rooms with better lighting than this one, from people who never once needed a blackout to look at me honestly. He didn't apologize for asking. He just nodded, the way he nodded at crates that needed lifting, and let the silence hold the rest of it. I want to say the rest of the yard changed slowly. that it was a gradual erosion, water on stone. It wasn't. It happened in one shift, and I remember every second of it. Orr came for him on a Tuesday with a transfer order, reassignment to the outer crushing bays, the worst posting in the yard, the kind given to men the administration wanted gone without the paperwork of firing them. He read it aloud at Marcus's table, in front of everyone, the way corrections are always read aloud, so the rest of us would understand the shape of the lesson. Marcus listened to the whole thing standing at attention, the way soldiers stand for orders they intend to obey. Then he picked up his tray, walked to my table, the way he had every day for 2 months, and sat down across from me one last time. That was when Petra Slonik, who had never once spoken to me, stood up from her seat 2 tables away and carried her tray over. She didn't say anything either. She just sat, on the empty bench beside mine, and started eating. Then the 2 Halverson brothers from the crushing line. Then the old woman who ran the scanner desk, whose name I still did not know because no one had ever introduced us. One by one, trays scraped across the floor of Underlight Yard, chairs pulled out, until there was no empty table left for the geometry of separation to make its point on. Orr stood in the middle of the room, holding a transfer order that had nowhere left to be enforced, because the crime it described, a man sitting where he wasn't supposed to, had become, in the space of 11 minutes, simply what everyone in the yard was doing. He tore the order up, not out of mercy, out of arithmetic. You cannot reassign an entire shift. Marcus didn't smile at the victory of it, didn't look around to see what he'd started. He looked at me, the way he always did, like a weight he intended to set down carefully, and he said the only thing he'd ever said to me that sounded like a vow rather than a kindness. "I'm not doing you a favor," he said. "I never was. I just don't see the mark on your cheek. I see you." I had been a princess of the cadet line once, 3rd in succession before a birth flaw in my caste marking wrote me out of every record that mattered. I had been looked at by physicians, by tutors, by a father who could not quite meet my eyes after the flaw was confirmed, by a court that filed me under diplomatic footnotes. I had never, in all of that looking, been seen the way one dockloader saw me across a metal table under fluorescent light, with a scarred eyebrow and a battered old music player, and 11 years of a uniform that had taught him not to trust the lists other people handed him. We still eat at that table. Petra sits across from us most shifts now, and Orr has learned to file his reports where the yard can't overhear them read aloud. My hair has grown back in, dark and short, and I have stopped covering the mark on my cheek with my collar. It is only a mark. It never said what they told me it said. Marcus still plays the old music sometimes, low, between shifts, the 2 of us leaning into the same worn speaker while the crates queue up outside. I do not know the names of the songs. I have stopped needing to. What I know is this, that a crown can be taken from you by men who never once looked you in the eye, and that it can be given back to you, quietly, without ceremony, by a man who never knew you'd worn one at all. He gave me a chair. He gave me a seat at a table no one else would share. In this yard, under this light, that turned out to be the same thing as a throne.